إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد, my dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah Azza wa Jal, He created us, and with that He knows full well what is best for mankind. He knows full well what is the reality of this dunya, and He knows full well what is the reality of the hereafter, what is the reality of al-akhirah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He did not leave us except that He informed us and gave us the full guidance, the full purpose, the full direction. He subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created death and life so that He may test you. Underline, so that He may test you whom from you will be the best in deeds, who will bring forward the best of a'mal, the best of actions. This above all should be your priority. This above all is the purpose of this existence, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to come forward on the day of judgment, the day of accountability, having brought forward as much of good deeds as you can, putting forward the best to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best that you can do. But the reality is, we face a great test and a great temptation of this worldly life. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he warned us. He warned us about this dunya. He said, إِنَّ الدُّنْيَا حُلْوَةٌ خَضِرَةٌ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مُسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِيهَا فَيَنْظُرْ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ فَاتَّقُوا الدُّنْيَا وَاتَّقُوا النِّسَاءَ فَإِنَّ أَوَّلَ فِتْنَةِ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ كَانَتْ فِي النِّسَاءِ. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says that this dunya has a kind of sweetness and greenery to it. It's alluring, it's tempting, it's attractive. This dunya is presented with such qualities. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مُسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِيهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed us in this dunya, generation after generation. فَيَنْظُرْ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. And He's watching and overseeing what is it that you will do. What actions will you have? What will you bring forward when your time here comes to pass, when the test of this dunya comes to an end. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, beware. فَاتَّقُوا الدُّنْيَا. Beware of this dunya. Beware of this dunya. How much of this dunya has victimized people? How many of people have failed this test? The Prophet ﷺ, he warns us, and it is upon us to take heed. It's upon us to be cautious and to be aware. When we look at the state of the Ummah today, what is the great disease that is inflicting this Ummah? What is the great problem that extends to all areas of our life? It is nothing. It is none other than the love of this dunya, the attachment that we have to this dunya. When you look from day one, in this day and age, a child is being raised and programmed to care so much for this dunya, to become so driven for the dunya, to admire this worldly life. One day, the Prophet ﷺ was given a gift of a beautiful garment. And he was amongst the companions, and they looked and they were touching and feeling and admiring the garment that the Prophet ﷺ was given. And he ﷺ, always correcting our understanding, always teaching lessons until the end of time. He said to them, أَتَعْجَبُونَ مِنْ هَذَا? Are you guys attracted or admiring this item here? And the Prophet ﷺ, he replied to them after they said yes. He said that the mandil, the tissue, the handkerchief of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh in Jannah is far better than this garment. We need to correct our understanding of this dunya. When you come and you ask anybody, do you prefer the dunya over the hereafter? I've never seen a man of deen who would say, Wallahi, I am a man of this dunya. Everybody knows the right answer. Everybody knows the magnitude of the hereafter. But are we just paying lip service to it? Where is it in practical terms? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. Do you prefer this worldly life when the hereafter is far greater and everlasting? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, كَلَّا بَلْ تُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةَ وَتَذَرُونَ الْآخِرَةَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, no, but they love the worldly life, the fleeting worldly life, and they forget about the hereafter. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ يُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةَ وَيَذَرُونَ وَرَاءَهُمْ يَوْمًا ثَقِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's warning us in numerous verses in the Quran about those who love the gratification of this dunya, the enjoyment, the immediate nature and pleasure, that little dopamine rush that you get when something is satisfying and pleasing. He's warning us not to be from those people, but rather to be concerned about the weighty day that is to come. The day is the hereafter. My dear brothers and sisters, think to yourself, when you go to sleep at night, what is it on your mind? When you sit alone, what do you find yourself worried about? What do you find yourself concerned about? You find the days and the years passing by, and before you know it, this life would come to an end. When we look through the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this worldly life as a zina. He describes it as lahun wa la'ib. It's a place of amusement. It's mata'ul ghurur. It's a place of deceptive pleasure. It's a place of play. It's a place of lahu and distraction. How many people live their life in a state of distraction, in a state of forgetfulness, forgetting the hereafter, disregarding their top priority and what should be their top concern, and distracted by the trivial matters of the dunya, distracted by things that don't amount to anything. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لو تعدل الدنيا عند الله جناح بعوضة ما سقى كافر منها شربة ماء. Prophet ﷺ, he says, if this dunya was to equate the amount, basically implying it's not even at that level. It's not equal even to the wing of a mosquito. And if it was, he would not give a disbeliever even a sip of water. This dunya is nothing. This dunya amounts to nothing. Don't be fooled. Don't be deceived. Don't let the days and weeks and months and years pass you by while you're distracted, while you're lost and confused about what is it that you should be doing. We need to refocus ourselves, reconnect with our sense of purpose. What is our direction? Where are we going? You know, when the Prophet ﷺ, to make a comparison for us, he made a comparison of the dunya to the hereafter when a person sticks their finger into the sea and looks at the water on his finger. That is barely nothing. That is the dunya in comparison to the hereafter. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us how to approach this dunya. What mindset should we have regarding this worldly life? How should we treat it? He says, كن في الدنيا كأنك غريب أو عابر سبيل. Be in this dunya just like a passerby, a traveler, a wayfarer. You're just coming, just like somebody who's pausing under the shade of a tree and will continue on. This dunya is temporary, but the hereafter is the eternal. To even make the example more clear, the Prophet ﷺ, one day, he came into the market, and as I mentioned, always teaching lessons, always instructing the companions, and for the Ummah till the end of time. The Prophet ﷺ, he was in the market, an environment of buying and selling, an environment when everyone's looking for a profit. The depths of where you find people drawn to the dunya is in the market. And he ﷺ, he came by a lamb, a sheep, a defective sheep that was dead. Jidyun asek. And its defect was that its ears were very, very short. And at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this was considered a big defect. And they had no use for a lamb with such a defect. And above that, it was a dead man. And the Prophet ﷺ, he grabbed this lamb by its ears. And he said to the companions, who would buy this for a dirham? Just a silver coin. Who would buy this sheep? And the companions replied, Yani, you have no use for it. Nobody of us would buy it. Yani, it's defective and it's dead. And the Prophet ﷺ, he took it even further. He said, who would take this sheep? Yani, who would take it for free? Just take it. And nobody wanted it. It's defective and we have no use for it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, فَوَاللَّهِ, he took an oath that this sheep in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yani, this dunya is more significant in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than this sheep is in your sight. Yani, what is the value of a dead sheep to you? A dead defective sheep, how much is it worth to you? How much does it matter to you? You wouldn't even care for it. You wouldn't look twice at it. A dead sheep that is decomposing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this dunya is more insignificant. It is more worthless than that dead sheep. So for us, my dear brothers and sisters, we really need to absorb the reality of this dunya. You know, a sick person who is in denial and maybe would be cured if they sought treatment and they went for treatment but is in denial and refuses, there's a possibility that they would not be healed. When we are inflicted of this sickness and we don't recognize and we don't acknowledge, then we will not make the change. This disease, the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about future nations and how the nations would gather around the Ummah of Mohammed ﷺ and basically attack them from all sides. And when he was asked, are we few in numbers at that time? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you were many, many in numbers. But he said, أَصَابَكُمُ الْوَهَنِ. And they asked, what is the wahan? You've been inflicted with wahan. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, الْوَهَنْ حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. It is the love of this dunya and the hating of death. My dear brothers and sisters, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid us to overcome the fitna of this dunya. أقول ما تسمعون واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. My dear brothers and sisters, some people think of this life as the real life, as the true life. They give it more than it is worth. They treat it and put it on a pedestal like it matters more than anything. And in reality, it is so insignificant. And on the day of judgment, after you lived in this life, and you die and you come to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will say, يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي. يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي. You will say, oh, how I wish I put good deeds forward for my life. Which life is this person talking about? It is not this life. The true life is the life of the hereafter. The true life is the everlasting life. the true investment that you will never lose is when you invest in your hereafter, when you put forward good deeds so you have on your scale, on your record on the day of judgment. We know the Prophet ﷺ, he said when the person dies, 3 things will go with him to his grave, but 2 will return and only 1 will remain. It will go with him his wealth, it will go with him his family, and it will go with him his deeds. His family will return, his wealth will go off to the inheritance, and the only thing that will remain, your only companion in that moment, is the good deeds, the sacrifices you made in this dunya for the hereafter, not for the dunya. You find many people, they're striving and working and blood, sweat and tears and every sacrifice they can make, and they are never lazy, all for the dunya. When it comes to salah in the masjid, they start to be lazy. When it comes to good deeds, Quran, dhikr, da'wah, I don't have time, brother. I am busy, brother. I can't do it, brother. It feels hard, it feels difficult. This is the mindset that we have. You want to assess the situation of an ummah, you want to assess the situation of the Muslims. Look at the masajid. We see them, mashallah, full on Jum'ah. But throughout the other salawat, you find 3, 4, 2 rows. Where are those who are concerned about the hereafter? It's not unusual to find somebody who's having a sleepless night, worried about the debt that they have, worried about the job that they're trying to get, worried about the exam that they have coming up, and they can't sleep, and they toss and they turn, and they wake up, and their eyes are like this, and you say to them, brother, what's wrong? I couldn't sleep, I had an exam, I have a job interview, and we say, oh, may Allah make it easy for you, and this and that, and it's adi. But who do we find having a sleepless night because they were praying the night prayer? Having a sleepless night because they were worried about the day of judgment. They were worried that this could be their last night. Who from us is having a sleepless night because they're worried about missing Salat al-Fajr? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the companions. He said, كَانُوا قَلِيلًا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ مَا يَهْجَعُونَ وَبِالْأَسْحَارِ هُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. This was the Sahaba. They would sleep little, but they were up in prayer. And before Fajr, they were praying, making dua, asking Allah. These are the hearts and minds of people worried about the hereafter. For many of us, we're worried and stressing about the dunya. And when you tell somebody about the akhirah, and you tell somebody about Salat al-Fajr, they say, relax. Allah Ghafurur Rahim. They're not so worried, they're not so concerned. And when they sleep in and they miss Salat al-Fajr, it's like, oopsie, it's okay, it doesn't bother them that much. But if they missed a project, or they missed a business opportunity, or their car got stolen, or they lost some money in an investment, they say for years, traumatized, upset, and every time it's brought up, they have regrets, and they have this and that. It's not enough to pay lip service. We almost say we prefer the akhirah. We almost say that we're preparing for the hereafter. But look at your day-to-day life. Look at your day-to-day life. Are you making the necessary sacrifices? Imagine you came to your wife and you told her day and night, I love you. I love you, oh Habibti. I love you. But you never made time for her. You never gave her the time of day. She would come at the end and say, do you really love me? Do you really love me? In reality, you don't. If we are really concerned about the hereafter, then it would reflect in our life. It would reflect in our a'mal. We would be striving to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So my dear brothers and sisters, I warn myself and you today of a great day to come, so be prepared. Allahumma aghfir lana dhunubana wa'afina wa'afu anna. Allahumma ahdina wahdi bina waj'alna hudatan mahdiyyin. Allahumma adkhilna al-jannah birahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhaban nar. Wa salli Allahumma ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad wa aqim as-salat.